Good afternoon, everyone here, and also to those of you who are joining online. My name is Adam Kahane. I'm connected to the Schwab Foundation for Social Innovation and Rios Partners, and I've spent the last 35 years not exactly on this topic, but on helping people, including people that don't agree with or like or trust each other, collaborate to address their most important and intractable challenges, and I think we have one here to talk about today. So I'm just going to give a minute of framing and then introduce and call on our wonderful panel. The 35 years has taught me that collaborating with unlike others is never simple or straightforward, whether that's in communities or families or organizations. And my sense of the moment we're living in, I don't think it's a news flash for anybody, is we're living in a time of dramatic political change. And I've been thinking this week that the things that I thought were done, trade agreements, defense agreements, climate agreements, DEI programs, are being undone in many parts of the world. And my approach to the panel this afternoon is that I think that the subject we're discussing, equity, inclusion, identity, are essentially political matters, small p political matters, in that this question of who is included and who matters and who has voice and influence and who sets the rules is what this is about. So I think in this context, increasing equity is not simple and straightforward. And so what I'm going to invite our four panelists to talk about from their different perspectives is how, in this current context of dramatic change, they approach this challenge of increasing equity. So Robert Garrett from Hackensack Meridian Health, you're a nonprofit healthcare organization, and you are committed to embedding DEI throughout the organization and also to working on health equity in the population you serve. So how are you approaching the challenge of increasing equity at the current moment?
Yeah, that's thank you, Adam, for that. It's a challenge for sure. Let me start by talking about how we plan to engage with policymakers, because I think it's important to accept the reality of where we are today, and certainly this week there's been a lot of developments. My approach is to really talk to the policymakers and try to find areas of agreement. And particularly with the administration in Washington, I do believe that there's a strong business case to be made to promote equity. Organizations and businesses that practice DE&I certainly have better results. The World Economic Forum pointed that out. They've had better financial results, increased innovation within their organizations. There's been less employee turnover, more employee engagement. So I would start to go at it from a business perspective. I'm not going to ever back off on the fact that it's the right thing to do as well, and it's certainly a big part of the mission at Hackensack Meridian Health. Our mission is to transform healthcare, and I don't see how you transform healthcare if you don't address inequities. And as you mentioned, Adam, our mission and our focus is also on the population that we serve, and we want to be sure that some of the inequities that exist today, and there are many in terms of lack of access to care, and also in terms of some of the healthcare outcomes that we see, and the disparities in those outcomes amongst groups and amongst populations. We need to address that, because if we don't address that, then we're not living our mission to transform healthcare.
Right. Thank you. Angela Williams, you're with United Way Worldwide, and you work at the intersection of business, government, and local communities to tackle systemic barriers to opportunity. So how are you approaching that objective or that mission in the current context of dramatic change?
I would say that as a 137-year-old organization, we continue to live out the vision that every person in every community can thrive. And thriving means being heard, being seen, having opportunity, whether it's access to health, whether it's youth opportunity, whether it's financial sustainability, or just community resilience. And so because we work in collaboration with government, with the corporate sector, and with other civil society organizations, and directly with people in communities, it's important for us to activate conversations in which everybody has a seat at the table. And we also recognize that no one entity can come into a community and say, we're the savior or we have the solution. It's about inviting people in to really talk about what their issues are, what their solutions are, and how do we come together. You mentioned that this is a small p political issue. I would also say it's honestly a human issue. And how do we as human beings work together? I think the big P creates this sense that if I allow one group of people to be able to have something, then another group are going to lose something. And I think that's the issue that we're dealing with, which is actually more rhetoric than reality. And so with our organization, we continue to engage. I tell my staff, I understand people may not like to use the words DEI or other words about equity or inclusion. I said, that's fine. The point is, we still have to do the work. So that's what we're about, doing the work.
Dominic, Arnall, you work for Open for Business globally, and we were talking yesterday, and you said, well, in a way following on what Angela said, that we don't necessarily have to use the same words as we used in previous contexts, and we don't necessarily have to use the same approach. And you said that maybe the current context calls for an approach other than loud and proud. So what approach do you think is useful in the current context?
Well, I should say that firstly, loud and proud, it can be quite a wonderful thing. It can be quite incredible to see someone really embodying who they are. Now, unfortunately, globally, there are 60 countries that criminalize same-sex relationships, 12 of which criminalize them with the death penalty. So for about half the world, and it's looking like soon it will be more than half the world, loud and proud isn't possible. And what huge parts of the world have done is recognize that in those environments, a different approach is needed. And some of those approaches are fantastic, actually. So I worry about loud and proud if it's been put on a pedestal as being the peak of achievement for our community. The more rainbows, the better. That certainly isn't my experience. And when we talk about how this space has evolved over the years, there was definitely a time when it looked like what corporate advocacy was in the LGBT sector was a sort of the more rainbows, the better. And people ask me all the time, well, have we seen fewer rainbow logos, for example? And I'll say yes, but we've seen more trans-inclusive healthcare policies. And for me, what we're witnessing, hopefully, and I'm not saying that there aren't enormous challenges at the moment, but is a maturing of the sector. And actually what people are looking at is, well, how do we get a diverse and inclusive staff body? And then how do we make sure that we're giving those people what they need to be their best?
Thank you. And lastly, Stefanie Stantcheva of the Social Economics Lab at Harvard. You study how different people think and reason about economic issues. So what does your research teach us about approaches to deal with this not simple and straightforward matter?
Yes, thank you for asking. I mean, I think there's two recent pieces of research we've done which are very informative here. The first actually relates a little bit to what you were saying, which is this idea of a zero-sum mindset. The idea that if some groups gain, others must lose. Like if you gain something, the pie is limited in size, and so it must come at the expense of someone else. As contrasted to this idea of a positive-sum view of the world, where everybody could be made better off. And so we did a very large study to try to see how people, reason, who has this mindset, who doesn't. And what has been particularly shocking is that younger people in many rich countries, in the US, in Germany, in France, are much more zero-sum than the older generations. And you can trace this back to the environments they grew up in. Younger people have grown up in these countries in periods with lower growth, lower mobility, and this scarcity mindset leads to this zero-sum mindset. And it doesn't have to be this way. While some situations are genuinely zero-sum, if you zoom out and take a broader perspective, often there is actually mutual scope for gain. And I think that's something that we have to work towards. And the second big idea, just briefly, is this difference between equality of opportunity versus equality of outcomes. So many people are actually really supportive of the idea that you should level the playing field. You should provide people with similar opportunities. But there is a lot of disagreement about equalizing outcomes, what you might call equality as opposed to equity. And unfortunately, it's a little bit in the eye of the beholder, where people will say, okay, this policy or this rule just equalizes opportunities versus it goes beyond that and tries to equalize outcomes, which people are much less supportive of. So I think this is another challenge to tackle in this context.
Yeah. So the four of you have been in this, maybe not in the trenches, but doing this work day in and day out for a long time, certainly more than I have. But I have the sense that this whole field of DE&I is really in a moment of great challenge, which maybe we're tempering in this conversation. So my question is, what do you think, well, I was going to say we, but what do you think you need to do differently now than what you thought a year ago or 5 years ago?
I'd like to jump in on that one
Yeah.
just for a quick second, then I actually have a question for Stefanie.
Please.
What my concern is that we don't go backwards where we had to make the business case for why there should be diversity in the room. That's antiquated thinking. Mm-hmm. It's imperialist thinking, colonial thinking. So I certainly hope we don't have to do that. That would be a tragedy. On the other hand, what I want us to continue to do is, I won't say loud and proud, but show up to have the conversations. And then where I'm switching to Stefanie is, and again though, reality shows that when you have a diverse population in a business, then usually their returns are much higher because you have different lenses by which your employees are engaging in the work. And so, I just wish we would stop with this zero-sumness and get to the togetherness.
So if I could, to get to your question, we're gonna continue on the same strategies that we've have embarked on. I've actually said that we're gonna double down on those strategies actually. So, let me just give you a few examples, and I'll divide my comments into two parts because we're a healthcare organization. I want to talk a little bit about health equity for the general population, but I also want to talk about DE&I efforts within our organization, Hackensack Meridian Health. So we come from one of the most diverse states in the nation, and I feel very strongly that our workforce needs to reflect that diversity and make sure that there is inclusion within our organization. I think that starts at the top. So we made a very deliberate effort to make sure that our board is reflective of our community and that we get those viewpoints at the board table. The same with our executive team. Our team members themselves do reflect the diversity of our community, but we had some work to do at the leadership level and at the board level, and we're making some good strides, and we're going to continue on that path. We're not going to change that just because the political winds might be blowing in a different direction. We have set up a very formal structure for DE&I within our organization. We have an executive council where I am the co-chair as the CEO, and our chief diversity officer is the other co-chair. We have work groups at each of our care sites, and they report in all of their efforts that they do each and every day. We also have established team member resource groups across our organization. We now have, I think there's 13 team member resource groups representing different populations within our organization. And to your point, Angela, about the zero-sum game, let me just give you a couple examples of where I think all boats do rise. So as just this past year, our Pride group came up with a recommendation that we should increase our in vitro fertilization benefits for that group. And we looked at it, we looked at the data, and honestly, we were pretty low in what we were paying for those types of procedures. But we didn't just do that for that one group. We increased the benefits across 36,000 team members, so all boats did rise. Our Black team member resource group suggested that we should be covering, as an example, doula benefits for expected mothers, and doulas can assist them during the pregnancy process, but also during the birthing process. We again looked at it, and we felt that was the right thing to do. So again, that just didn't, when we included that benefit, that just didn't work for the Black team member resource group. That worked for all of our team members. So all boats can really rise. Now, with respect to health equity, one thing that we've done, I think that's very effective, it addresses socio-economic issues that are preventing health equity, but it also helps in identify individuals and identities and groups that are not receiving proper health equity. And that is that we've instituted a screening program across our network. So anybody that comes in contact with our health network gets screened for one or more of the social determinants of health. And that could be, food insecurities, unstable housing, lack of transportation. Those are the barriers that are preventing individuals from staying healthy. And then what are we doing? As I said, we screened 2 million of individuals over the last couple of years. We've made 4 million referrals for people to get help. But then we took it a step further, and this is where it really gets into the real essence of DE&I. We took the data and then we segmented it by individual ethnic, racial groups, by other demographic factors, so that we could institute specific programs in those communities that would help those individuals. So from my perspective, it's full steam ahead, because those are the right things to do, as you're saying, Angela. And it does make good business sense, but we're doing it because it's the right thing to do.
Stefanie, if I could just ask you a question related to the research you said. What I notice a lot in the sectors I work in is increasing polarization and fragmentation and even demonization. So I might not want there to be a zero-sum mindset, but you're saying you're seeing that in certain populations, including younger populations. So how do you see the way forward given the current reality as you understand it?
It is very challenging because this is a trend that's there not just in the US, it's there in other rich countries, and it's very, very strong. And it's linked both to your personal history, so if you and your family have done more poorly, you're more likely to be zero-sum, and it's also linked to these macroeconomic factors. Growth has declined, mobility has declined in many countries, and so the younger generations have grown up in these environments, which fosters the zero-sum mindset. So it's very challenging to think how to move forward, but I think there's a big role here for organizations, for the media as well, because every situation, in a sense, can be pitched in different ways, right? You can take the super narrow approach of, today you get the promotion, so I don't get it. That's obviously zero-sum. Versus, well, let's zoom out. We could still work together, and next year, with your mentoring or your help or our collaboration, maybe we'll both be better off. You emphasize great examples, all of you here in organizations. So I think there's definitely a narrative here, and it's important to not let the more negative narratives take hold systematically, which I think is happening quite a lot right now.
Do you want to come in?
Sure, yeah. I was just going to respond to Angela's comment, which I thought was really interesting. Part of what we do as an organisation is economic case reports for LGBT inclusion. So, of course, I had to. I thought I should comment on it. I think that we probably agree on on the purpose of diversity and the purpose of human rights, and the fact that we shouldn't be putting pound signs on people's heads and saying this person's worth X, this person's worth Y. I think where we found this work really helpful is where people do not share that view specifically. So with people either in the business community, but in the global community that need convincing another way, or in another way need something to say, right, because they're perhaps not comfortable talking about LGBTQ issues. And you know, I've been doing this a long time. I can go into a room now, talk about LGBTQ issues, and I can see someone's toes curl over the way, right? That person is so much more comfortable saying, you know, this allows us to bring the best talent from across the world. And you know what else? It's true. I mean, it's an economic argument, but it's true. LGBT inclusion does benefit businesses. So for me, it's not an either or, and we must never rely on economic arguments alone.
Oh no, what I was just saying, I wish we were beyond having to do that.
Oh yeah.
Unfortunately, yes, you're right. We still have to make the case.
Yeah.
But it's just so sad that we still have to make that case.
Isn't it just? I completely agree.
That's true.
So I wanted to turn the conversation to a different aspect of this, which has just occurred to me. My experience sitting here in this panel is that I'm calming down and seeing more opportunity to be productive here in this issue than I imagined when we started the panel. Somebody once defined leadership as being a non-anxious presence amid anxious others. So I think we are amid anxious others in many parts of the world, perhaps this week in the US, but as you say, these are not only American issues. And so I guess the question I'm curious about is what kind of leadership, or how are you approaching this personally as leaders? You are all four of you in your own quite different spheres, and you are in a world of anxiety and fragmentation and polarization, and in some cases demonization. So how do you think about how you yourself need to show up to be helpful in this context?
If I could, I thought about as you were posing that question, and one of the, I think, underrepresented aspects of a good leadership is listening skills. And somebody sent me this book that said that, and there's a quote in the book that said that leaders who don't listen eventually are surrounded by people who have nothing to say. By the way, it was my wife that sent me that, just for the record. But going back to listening, one thing that I feel very strongly about, and we instituted this as part of our DEI program, is what we call listening to understand. So we have days of understanding. We kind of pause and we have those crucial conversations about race, about identity, about equality, about inclusion, and we listen. And we go around the organization. There are small groups, and we learn a lot, and then we publish those results, and we act upon those results. So I do think, as a leader, for me to really understand how people are feeling, are they feeling included? Are they feeling that this is an equitable culture? I have to listen. I can't just assume things, and I can't just go out there and make a speech and say that this is the way it is, or this is the way it's not. I think listening is a very important part of being a good leader.
And what I hear him saying is that as a leader in an anxious world, you learn how to be agile. Mm-hmm. And so even in the listening, you may be down a certain pathway, but then understand there's an opportunity to direct in a new way. Yes. And it's okay. Yes. And to be settled in that.
That's correct. Yeah, agility is more important than ever before. Yes.
And if I can add something here about, what research shows, which is very, very related to this, is that we all do have some strong biases, and we might be more or less aware of them. But one bias that we have is that we tend to view ourselves much more favorably than others because we know our own internal thoughts. If I'm late to work, I know it's because I went through all of this and this happened and this was very justified. If I see someone else being late at work, I immediately assume a reason for them. I do not know their thoughts and their real situation. And so this prevents us from actually really empathizing with what others are going through. And a lot of research interventions that do work is actually perspective taking, making people literally put themselves in the shoes of others and start to realize, the difficulties they're facing, the constraints they're facing. And that is something that I think is super, super important, because otherwise we just have no idea what others are going through, and our biases work against us here.
Mm-hmm. And if I can just pick up on the word you used, Angela, about agility. For me, this means that we may have an idea about the right approach, but we also have to be listening enough to know, well, yeah, I thought that was right, but in this current context, in this time, or in this country, we're going to have to take a different approach and not hold on so tightly to the plan and the language we've negotiated that we can't adjust to reality, political reality, social reality, technological reality, but to be, if we're in a period of change where many things are not as we thought they would be, or not as we expected or hoped they would be, then we have to be able to listen and to be agile. So I think these are two basic but very crucial ingredients.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I was responding to the earlier point about leadership during this time. And I think the LGBT community have come under a range of attacks before. So, not the first rodeo for this sector.
Right.
And I think what I have always been just so incredibly impressed about, and what I really love about my job, I guess, is to watch people take time to have that impact and have that impact on them, and then to say, right, well, let's get to work. Because the work doesn't happen when things are easy and when you're going downhill. The work happens when you hit challenges and you have to work out how to respond in the new environment. So even though I think you're absolutely right, this is a challenging time, no doubt, for DEI, for LGBTQ people, what I'm certain of is that the community will respond as they always have. And that solutions will be found, and that's in the business community, the LGBTQ community. The range of topics that sits under DEI, everything from inclusive hiring practices through to maybe taking part in Pride, through to making sure that certain apprenticeships is funded. That's not really what's being attacked here. They're going after the acronym DEI, and they're going after a sort of dream about what DEI is. And I think we may well, there was a time when I think grouping all of those things together under that umbrella was an incredibly helpful thing to do. There's something we're talking about, something the businesses that form our coalition are talking about, is whether or not that time has passed. And I think that remains to be seen.
Could I just add one more aspect to leadership? Angela said agility, which is so important. I think we talked about listening a little bit. I think leaders today, given the environment we're in, also need to be courageous. I think that's a really important attribute right now, because this is, and that's what leadership's about. I mean, we have to be courageous all the time, but particularly in these times, I think we need to show courage, and we need to show that we're true to our principles.
Yeah, and what you said, Dominic, also reminded me that this is a long story.
Exactly.
And the search for equity has many generations of people behind it, and there's times when things go in one direction and times when they go in another direction. So I guess part of having a non-anxious presence is recognizing that, we'll get through this and we'll find a way.
And the generational point is incredibly important, because 25% of young people in the US identify as LGBTQ. About 75% want to work in an inclusive environment. And I can't help but think that when some of the negative statements come out about DEI, you've got people in the recruitment department sort of pulling their hair out thinking, what's this going to do to our talent pipeline? Because young, talented people are going to want to work in places that reflect their values. They're very clear about what their values are. They've saying the same thing survey after survey. So if businesses aren't reflecting those values, they will choose with their feet.
Yeah. I wonder if we might take a few questions. What's on your mind about this topic? Please, go ahead.
Hello everyone, my name is Pedro and I'm a global shipper from Brazil. And basically my question is, how can we use artificial intelligence or technology tools to promote inclusion and create a more accessible digital world for underrepresented communities, such as those without internet access or technological resources?
I would say that,
Oh, please go ahead.
I was just going to say, one of the things that we focus on is digital equity, because you know that if a young person doesn't have access to the internet, they're not going to be able to really learn and to be exposed. And then those that are left behind in terms of connectivity, learning about other cultures, other people, then we see a world that is going to end up continuing to be very limited. And the best of all of humanity comes out when we're together and working together. Your point about technology is key. It's been an issue before AI, and now AI is here. And I think it's even more heightened as an issue because technology is moving so fast. What do we do? One of the things that I'm on the Open AI Ethics Council where Sam Altman is the co-chair. And just last month, as part of that council, we announced a partnership with a college to help low-income and students of color get into the technology game, be trained in it, have degrees in it so that they can even work in AI. So when I think about technology, AI, development, using it as a tool for education, for workforce development, and more, there's a lot that needs to be done. And then even when you think about in the context of DEI, how you can have learning platforms that also help to educate people about differences, which really should not separate us.
Mm.
I'm so glad that you, Angela, emphasized the positive aspect here because there's also, I think, a big cautionary tale. So at the moment, AI, machine learning are being used to basically automate decisions that normally humans take, say, for instance, in the criminal justice system or in medical practices. And the problem there is that the idea is to actually take human biases out of it by outsourcing it to an algorithm, but there is what's called algorithmic discrimination, which is that the training data you're using is actually already biased because it is the result of years and years of decisions. And so there's a lot of really interesting research showing that this can actually perpetuate the existing biases that are there. So this is a big cautionary tale on how to use these technologies to actually do what they're supposed to do, but not just perpetuate what's been happening until now.
And if I could just add one thing from the healthcare lens to your question. We're using digital strategies and AI to really connect many underserved communities to healthcare providers. There are shortages of healthcare providers, and particularly in some of the communities that we serve, there isn't access to primary care physicians. There's not access to mental health providers. So really through a digital means, we can now connect those communities with providers, and they're getting help a lot quicker. So that whole issue that I spoke about earlier about providing equal access to care, equitable access to care, I think certainly technology can help us achieve that.
I saw another hand. Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks very much. I enjoyed the comments so far. I just wanted, we're at the World Economic Forum, so I'm interested in just looking across the world. I realize that different countries are at different levels of maturity in terms of the DEI programs. And I just wondered if you could comment on the implications of that for companies or organizations that work across the world.
Angela, I think several of you work across the world. Dominic, how do you see this if we differentiate it, not talk about everything being the same, but talking about what's different?
I think that's really well put. And I think it's a complicated conversation, because I think the way people like to think of that is sort of a long line with the West on one end and everyone else somewhere else. And genuinely, that's not my experience of working around the world. I think that there is some fantastic equitable practice happening all around the world, sometimes in areas where it's pretty tricky, certainly in my space. And I think what we're seeing actually is this sort of sense recently that I don't know, the US is somehow losing its crown or something like that. And I think actually those arguments don't stand up to much scrutiny, not because the US isn't in a difficult place, but because actually the US has always been inequitable for lots of people. So I don't think it's the same I don't think levels of maturity is quite right. I'm struggling for a better way to put it. I think what I'd say is that actually we have a lot to learn from each other, and it's why platforms like this are so important.
Angela?
What I've seen when it comes to the conversation about DEI, and the real world example is that there was an incident that happened in the United States where a policeman killed a black man, George Floyd. And after that moment, it was during COVID, it sparked a lot of conversation and policies around DEI. And our worldwide board issued a mandate that all of our organizations must have a DEI policy and certify on that on a yearly basis. Well, we're in then it was 37, 38 countries. And the US organizations understood why this occurred, but Eastern Europe, they're like Asia, they're like, what's the issue? Why do we have to do that? And so it requires a lot of really careful conversation, and then especially in communities and countries where it's not as diverse, actually. There's a complacency that, oh, well, we're all alike, we're fine. And then not wanting to even dive deeper into the differences within even a community that on the surface looks alike. So I just see the opportunity to continue to have the conversations, to bring people together, to talk about these differences that are not deficiencies, and how do we celebrate the differences, and again, how do we make sure that the different lenses and worldviews are brought to the table so that we can all engage together.
Please.
Thank you for your insights. They've been fascinating. There's an element of the DI conversation that we don't usually see, and it's linked to the demographic transition. So the profile of the world is changing with immigration flows. Countries with a linguistic majority no longer hold that, or religious majority don't longer hold that. The median class is thinning or growing. Countries are growing older or younger. And to what extent do you think that we're able to bring the lessons that we've learned so far into that future? How can the DEI narratives, tools, and conversations evolve to match the changes that we're seeing in the world? Thank you.
Yeah, I was thinking something along similar lines, so let me add my question to yours, which is that if I had a sense, I said at the beginning that I have a sense of things that I thought had been done were being undone. But I think my understanding was wrong in a way, that lots of things are changing politically, but also socially and technologically. Lots of things are different in different places. And so I think the sense I had that, okay, we know how to deal with this, why don't we just keep going, which is a bit of a North American attitude, that there is a universal answer to challenging issues.
Is there something wrong with that?
So Yeah, so I think perhaps a more realistic sense is that we're just going to have to figure this out as we go. But I wonder how you think about this, because especially in the years following George Floyd, I had the sense, at least in North America, that, okay, there's one thing to be done here and we all must do it, and if you don't get it, then maybe you need some more training and then you'll get it. But I wonder whether that makes sense in the world we're living in.
It's a really interesting reflection. And I think I've reflected over the last year, say, very much on our approach in DEI, which I've been a part of. And I wondered, have we done everything we could to bring everybody with us? Does everyone know what DEI is for? Has been a question that's really rung in my mind. I think that the purpose of DEI is meritocracy for me, which is why it makes things like the recent news we had today so strange. You know, the executive order that came out that spoke about a sort of decline in DEI to support meritocracy, when DEI is meritocracy for me. And I wonder if we've made that case substantially enough, because I think that if we had, that executive order would be impossible. I think people would understand that this isn't about bringing other people down. And I also wonder whether or not we've made, in some ways, the business case strong enough, because I think we've been very clear throughout the last 10 years that businesses are doing this because it's the right thing to do. We've been pretty heavy on that, and I think they are doing it because it's the right thing to do. But I think it also benefits them, and I think that's okay. I think it's okay that we talk about how diversity benefits everyone. Yeah. And not just, I should say, not just minoritized communities. I believe that diversity benefits everyone.
And I do think...
So I'm going to invite each of the other three of you to make a last reflection. And what I appreciated, Dominic, is you have an opinion, but you're also asking yourself questions about, given the current context, given where we are, I wonder whether we need to rethink. So I just invite the other three of you, what would you like to say to conclude, including what questions are you asking yourself these days or this day?
Well, if I could just weigh in, and pick up on Dominic and on your question just a little bit. The way we think about it, with the changing demographic, with the aging of both our employee population, but just the aging of the population in general, we're trying to segment different messages to those specific groups and different ways of really communicating that. Folks receive messages in different ways depending on their age, depending on their access to technology. So we are thinking about that. I don't think we've been 100% effective at that, but I think we are starting to think about that. To your point, which is well taken, that the world is changing, the demographics are changing, and in terms of the messaging, we need to be responsive to that. But as a closing comment, I would just say that these are challenging times. These are where we need to, as I said before, we need to be courageous. We certainly, from my perspective, this is the right thing to do. We need to continue on those efforts. Maybe, as my colleagues have said, we might need to do a better job of getting that message across. So what does that mean to me? That means I got to work harder at it, because it is the right thing to do, but it means I got to work a little harder at it.
Stefanie?
I'm very much thinking about your question, because what we see is that you mentioned immigration, for instance, and when people have extremely wrong perceptions about immigrants in their countries in general, it's very stark misperceptions that people have. And as societies become more fragmented, what we see is that generosity just doesn't travel as well across, ethnic, religious, national lines as it does within. And so this will have ramifications even on public policies like redistributive policies, progressive taxation, social insurance, which are really suffering from, people just not wanting to give to groups other than theirs. And so this is something that very much worries me. But on the more positive side, there are lots of interventions that have been studied to really try to change people's mindsets and perceptions, and that's where I'm sort of hoping to work on and trying to focus on, because there can be powerful, mindsets are powerful, and changing mindsets is also something very powerful.
The last word.
I just want to be the demonstration of what we're talking about.
So thank you all very much. Thank you for your attention, and please join me in giving this wonderful panel a round of applause.